What if I told you that the survival of America's supply chain in 2025 doesn't rest in California or Texas, but in British Columbia? What if the goods you rely on every single day, your phone, your groceries, your car parts, aren't entering through US ports at all, but are instead making a quiet, efficient journey through Canadian soil? Sounds unlikely? Then buckle up, because the real story behind North America's shifting logistics is not just surprising, it's game-changing. And it's happening right now, under everyone's noses. This is the untold story of how Canadian ports, especially Vancouver and Prince Rupert, have become the most crucial arteries for American goods. And the truth is, it didn't happen by accident. It happened because the US dropped the ball. While America's largest ports crumbled under political dysfunction, outdated infrastructure, and labor chaos, Canada made long-term investments that are now paying off in a very big way. Today, the US depends on Canadian ports more than it wants to admit, and this growing dependence could reshape not just trade, but the geopolitical balance across the entire continent. Imagine you're running a logistics operation for a Fortune 500 company. You're watching shipping times grow, port congestion skyrocket, and unions stage walkouts on America's West Coast. Every delay costs you millions. And then you get a call from a Canadian freight coordinator offering an alternative route, one that bypasses the mess entirely. Your goods dock in Prince Rupert or Vancouver, travel seamlessly via Canadian National Railway, and arrive at their destination in half the time. What would you do? In 2025, companies aren't just considering this, they are acting on it. Here's the number that's waking up boardrooms. Over 20% of West Coast US-bound cargo is now being rerouted through Canadian ports. That number has doubled since 2022, and it's still climbing. Why? Because Canadian ports are simply better at the one thing that matters most in global trade, consistency. While the US has struggled to get cranes working and truckers moving, Canada has optimized every piece of its logistics puzzle. It didn't happen overnight. Over the past decade, Canada invested billions into port expansion, inland terminals, and rail connectivity, especially along the Pacific Gateway corridor. That gamble is now paying off big time. Prince Rupert is now the fastest-growing container port in North America. Not just for Canadian exports, but for American-bound imports. That's right. Canada is now moving US goods more efficiently than America can move its own. And if you're wondering whether this is just a short-term fix, think again. Canadian policymakers know exactly what they are sitting on, a strategic asset that gives them economic and diplomatic leverage. Prime Minister Mark Carney has spoken publicly about enhancing critical infrastructure sovereignty, and port access for foreign cargo is on the table. Think about that. America's Lifeline could become Canada's bargaining chip. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. This isn't just about Asia-Pacific trade. Canadian ports are also booming on the Atlantic side. Halifax is seeing container growth from Europe and Africa. And guess what? A large chunk of that cargo is heading straight into the US Eastern Corridor through Quebec and New York. These aren't random decisions, they are coordinated strategies that allow Canadian infrastructure to funnel global commerce into American markets. And the best part for Canadian operators? They are getting paid. US companies are paying record fees to access Canadian logistics. This is not charity. This is business. Canada is profiting, expanding, and gaining strategic leverage, all while helping solve America's logistics crisis. But what happens when that help comes at a price? Because here's the ticking clock nobody's talking about. What happens when Canadian exporters start demanding priority lane access at their own ports? What happens when domestic Canadian freight hits capacity? Will American cargo still get the red carpet treatment? Or will it suddenly be bumped, delayed, or even priced out? It's not a hypothetical, it's already happening in small ways. Carney's government has floated the idea of a carbon surcharge on heavy freight moving through Canadian ports, particularly US-bound goods. The rationale? Climate targets. But the effect? American companies might suddenly find their cheapest, fastest trade routes becoming costly and complicated. Let me paint a scenario. You're an American auto manufacturer with components shipped from Japan. You've been using the port of Vancouver to avoid the chaos in Seattle. It's worked like a charm, until next quarter, when a new Canadian emissions policy adds $300 per container. Suddenly, your entire pricing model shifts. You're scrambling. Multiply that by thousands of containers and you start to understand why this isn't just a shipping issue, it's a national economic concern. Now ask yourself, how did the world's largest economy end up dependent on another country's infrastructure to keep its own shelves stocked? It wasn't inevitable. The US had every opportunity to fix its own ports. But instead, years of congressional gridlock, anti-union crackdowns, and crumbling port technology turned vital hubs like Long Beach and Savannah into choke points. Meanwhile, Canada kept building. Automated cranes, high-speed rail interchanges, digitized customs procedures, it's all there, and it works. So when a major company looks at the map and sees that shipping to America through Canada saves time and money, the choice is obvious. And this isn't just for coastal regions. With Canada's rail lines running deep into the American Midwest, even cities like Chicago, Minneapolis, and Dallas are now receiving goods routed through Canadian ports. Think about that. A toaster built in Korea, unloaded in Prince Rupert, and delivered to a Walmart in Nebraska, without touching a single US dock. And still, most Americans have no idea it's happening. That's why this video is so important. This isn't just a story about trade routes, it's a story about sovereignty, control, and future risk. Because every time we outsource something critical, whether it's semiconductors, oil, or now, port access, we give up leverage. And leverage matters. Let me ask you a question. If a diplomatic crisis erupted tomorrow between the US and Canada, what happens to those ports? Could Canada legally slow down or restrict US-bound shipments? Technically, yes. Would they? That depends on the stakes. But even the fact that it's a question should make every American business leader nervous. And let's not forget, this dependence works both ways. Canada is benefiting massively from US transit. American companies are paying billions into Canadian rail, customs, and port fees. That money is helping fund Canadian green infrastructure, housing near ports, and local economies in cities like Vancouver and Prince Rupert. It's a symbiotic relationship, for now. But what happens when interests diverge? What happens when Canada's environmental goals, labor standards, or foreign policy priorities begin to clash with those of the US? Could America find itself economically blackmailed, not by a hostile regime, but by its closest ally? It's not just a possibility. It's a geopolitical scenario already being quietly discussed in think tanks and policy rooms on both sides of the border. And here's the kicker. China is watching this very closely. Beijing knows that supply chain resilience is the new gold. While Washington is trying to bring manufacturing back home, its goods are still flowing through foreign ports. That's vulnerability. And vulnerabilities are leverage points in international diplomacy. So, what should America do? Should it double down on Canadian access and try to formalize port-sharing agreements? Or should it pour money into revitalizing its own ports, something that would take years and billions of dollars, with no guarantee of political follow-through? That's the cliffhanger. No one wants to admit it, but the US is now in a strategic port partnership it didn't plan for, and may not control. If you've watched this far, you now know more than most people in the C-suites and political offices across America. You understand the hidden power of Canadian ports and the quiet ways they've become the backbone of US commerce. And the next time someone says made in America, ask them where it entered the country. You might be surprised by the answer. This is the kind of story that reshapes how we think about borders, trade, and power. If this video opened your eyes, smash that like button to let the algorithm know it matters. Subscribe for weekly breakdowns of global trends you won't hear on the nightly news. And drop a comment, what do you think America should do about its port dependence on Canada? Should Washington invest in its own infrastructure, or double down on this silent alliance? Thanks for watching, and remember, trade isn't just about products. It's about trust, timing, and who controls the gate. See you in the next video.